Hey there, my name is Anna Deeb. I'm an associate professor of communication, and today I want to share a little bit about how to write an academic essay, especially for the communication field. These are qualitative essays, meaning that you should not be doing any quantitative research. That is differently structured. So, this is for writing a qualitative academic essay. I also want to say thanks to several colleagues at Colorado State and the University of Georgia and Brenau University who gave me ideas and materials to create this PowerPoint. Now, the goal of seminars and classes is often to have a conference submission ready work or to be at the level where at the end of the class, you can submit your essay to a conference and be able to have it considered and oftentimes accepted. So that's pretty exciting. I also want you to always remember when writing an academic essay is that you want to keep communication at the fore. What is communication doing? Uh, and so your theories and your artifacts, you should be thinking constantly about communication. Don't lose that thread. Finally, I encourage you to look at other examples of academic essays. Not all academic essays are going to be structured in this way, and you can find lots of examples in academic journals, in textbooks, and from fellow students and professors and other colleagues. So let's dive in. The communication philosopher and theorist Kenneth Burke is pictured here on the left. And he had a couple of metaphors for thinking about how to enter the scholarly conversation, which is what students are asked to do anytime they write an academic essay. So he talks first about academia as sort of a flow of ideas, like a river. And you, writing an academic essay, dip your oar into that river. You're in your kayak and you dip your oar into the river. So that's one way to think about that. He also talks about a parlor where there's a party going on, a little bit old fashioned. So you can think of someone's apartment or at a friend's house. You're going to step into a party. There's groups of people talking to each other. There's no way that's humanly possible for you to enter every conversation that's going on in that room in the parlor, but you can certainly enter two or three conversations, hear what other people think and say about a topic or an issue, and then join that conversation with your own thoughts before you drift away again. And so that's sort of how you're entering the scholarly conversation. You're going to describe in this essay what's already existing, what other thoughts and academic writing has been done about your subject or subjects, and then you're going to bring your own opinion and thoughts and ideas to the conversation so that you then leave room for other people to enter the conversation. I hope that is inspiring and at least interesting as you embark on your projects. Let's look at how an academic essay is typically organized. So these are the 6 components, and you can pause the video here to jot these down. You won't need all of these elements in every essay, or they might look different depending on the course or the project, but I'm going to talk about each of these in turn to see what you might be able to use. Under analysis, it says advancing major claim about mass communication. That could also be about communication in general, not just mass communication. All right, let's talk about your introduction. What is the purpose of an introduction of any academic paper? Well, you're looking to generate interest in your topic. You want to have a hook or some way to grab people's attention. It might be sharing some historical background related to your subject. It might be narrating an event or an issue that's going to be central to your analysis. Whatever the hook may be, you want to grab your reader's attention and keep them reading. You certainly want to state clearly what is the area of research or the problem that you want to solve, or establish the value and importance of a study. Are there gaps in literature that you're looking to address in an already popular topic? Or do you want to bring to the fore a topic that hasn't been studied very much, but that deserves our attention? So, in so doing, or alternatively, you can establish the significance or importance of an artifact that you're studying or a theory that you're developing or advancing or adding to. So basically, you're just making the case, why keep reading? And then you want to end the introduction, which could be anywhere from a few paragraphs to a few pages, with a clear thesis or argument that you're going to be making throughout your paper and a preview of what's to come. So your thesis should sort of stand on its own or start a paragraph by saying something authoritative. In what follows, I will argue that, or in this essay, I contend that, I find that, etc. And then in your preview, you want to lay out a roadmap for your paper. You want to clearly elucidate what your reader should be looking for in this 15 to 20 page plus paper. That's about the standard conference length papers, 15 to 22 pages. So what are you going to cover? I'll begin with an overview of existing literature and then move into the methodology used to conduct my analysis. Finally, I'll lay out my arguments for why blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So, lay out the key moves that you're going to make and that you'll finish by bringing it all together, discussing key findings, limitations, and so forth. And use those words that highlight where you're going first, next, finally. All of that is important for helping your reader follow along. You don't want to make it difficult for them. When your introduction is complete, I have some thesis and preview examples for you. So let's say my thesis, I'm writing a rhetorical criticism or a rhetorical paper. I might say presidents are known to persuade their audiences through relatable stories. I argue that Donald Trump's speech represents a narrative of freedom through economic prosperity, which helps him identify with his supporters. Okay, so you will see that a thesis statement like that gives us a hint of where you're going to be going. But in your preview, you can share a little bit more information to tee up the rest of your long paper. In a preview, I might say, in what follows, I examine Donald Trump's speech through a narrative perspective and through Burke's theory of identification. I'm letting the reader know, here are my major theoretical lenses or approaches. Then I share specifically, I turn to the works of Walter Fisher and other scholars who've illustrated the use of narrative theory to understand cultural phenomena. So that's the first sub-argument that's going to support my main argument. And then second, my next sub-argument, I engage Burke's theory of identification to explain how speakers connect with their constituents through highlighting their shared goals and values. So as a reader, I have a taste of the key arguments that are coming, but I haven't laid it all out in detail because that's, of course, what the analysis is for. Okay, now we move to the context section. This is not required in every case or in every academic essay, but it could be useful for helping your audience understand your artifact or the major components or ideas behind what you're studying so that we can all get on the same page. There might be artifacts or events that you need to break down in order for us to understand your analysis. You provide context for a speech, for a movie, for an artifact, or set up why conversations have been happening around the issue you're studying. So you're going to answer questions like, who was involved? Who was the rhetor or the writer or the utterer of the content, or the director of the movie, etc.? What is it? If it's a movie, what is a synopsis of the plot to just let us know, if we've never seen it before, what it's all about? When did the movie debut? When did the speech happen? When was the song written? Where did this appear? Who was in the audience that experienced it, as best as we know? Why was it created? What was the exigence behind it? Okay. For a movie, in my example, what were the box office sales? Was it largely successful initially, or did it gain cult status and people have watched it for decades since? I'm thinking of something like Rocky Horror Picture Show. What were the critical reactions? What are things that we need to know as readers to understand what you're studying? Okay. You can work with your professors or bounce your ideas off of other scholars to see if you need a context section. Third, your literature review. This is crucial because a literature review lays out what's already been said about your topics or your topic of interest. So it serves as a launching point for your analysis. Here's what we already know and what I'm about to build upon with my analysis. That's basically what you're doing in this section. So I encourage you to structure your literature review around 2 to 4 themes that relate to your topic. For example, if you're studying the portrayal of women in media in the 1980s, then you might want to structure your themes around objectification of women as one theme, and then roles for women in 80s movies, and then what studies have already been done that specifically hone in on the representation of women in film. That will create a great groundwork for you to conduct your analysis on women in 80s film. Okay, so you want to make sure if you are covering a particular theory or area of study that you are also sharing seminal works or original works that really establish that idea in academia. So who originated the theory or the studies that have been done in the past, you want to make sure you're hitting on the most important ones, right? So aim for about 3 to 5 articles per theme or per topic at minimum. That's probably going to give you enough ground to stand on to convey what's going on in that area and how it's going to be relevant to your work. Once you have laid out all these themes, you can elaborate upon what you feel like is missing. Okay, while scholars have studied the representation of women in film, they have not looked at John Hughes's body of work and the representation of women. And the reason why it's important that we do that is these were some of the most popular movies of the time. I am just making this up, by the way, as an example, but your job is to identify a gap or to answer a question or to dig deeper where others have not been able to do before you. And that is your unique contribution that you're bringing with your work. So what is that going to be? This is a chance in your literature review to identify that for your readers. And then it's time to move into the methodology. This can cause students to trip up a little bit, but really this is the place where you're doing 2 things. You're describing where you're coming from with your, or how, where your analysis is based from and how you're going to do it, and the process for how you collected the artifacts or the ideas that you're going to be analyzing. So firstly, with describing your worldview, are you coming from a critical cultural perspective? Are you coming from a feminist perspective? Are you coming from a Marxist perspective? So you want to establish where you're coming from, through what lens you're analyzing your content. What is your personal stake in this? If that's relevant, you don't always have to say that, but why are you personally interested in this? And the theoretical lens at the level of theory, maybe you want to examine something through feminist theory or through message effects or otherwise, uses and gratifications theory. You'll want to lay out what each of those theories is and maybe relevant past applications of that theory if you didn't cover those in your literature review. And then why choose the lenses that you chose? Explain that for your reader. Why are they helpful for your project? So that goes hand in hand with laying out your process for collecting data, artifacts, or ideas that you're going to comb for analytical material. So what is your sample for study? Let's say I'm going through the feminist theory lens. I know that there are particular ways that feminism tells us that women have been objectified or portrayed in the past through media. So that will be the grounding or the ideas in which I create themes or patterns that I'll be looking for in my data set. And again, we're not doing quantitative work, but we are going to be looking at media artifacts potentially, or communication artifacts. So I chose three John Hughes movies from the 80s that feature a woman as the star. If you're not familiar with these movies, they are romantic comedies typically. And I'm going to be watching those three movies. I chose those three for they're the most popular and they're over this period of time. I can't look at them all. So here's why I chose these, my justification for choosing this data, and then how I watched each one. What themes was I looking for? All right. I went over those already in my literature review. And then I can interpret each one of those in my analysis. So I'm basically walking you through the lens I used, or the lenses I used first, and then how I created a data set. Or if you're doing more of a rhetorical project, why did I choose the rhetorical artifact I did? I'm looking at this body of speeches, or I'm going to do a close textual analysis of this speech because I feel that it will get us this information or new knowledge. All right. So the methodology could be about 1 to 3 pages. Just make sure you're backing up why you're doing things the way you are in your analysis. All right. And finally, we get to the meat and potatoes of your paper, which is the analysis. This is where you aim to answer a research question or deliver on the thesis that you presented in your introduction. Your goal typically with an academic paper is to advance one major new argument. This is your fresh contribution to the scholarly conversation where you're filling a gap that hasn't yet been explored. Okay. I suggest making at least 2 claims or sub-arguments to back up this major argument that you're making. The analysis should be the longest section of your essay. This is the main event. This is the show that we came to see. And so definitely give this section a lot of time and attention. The goal here is to bring forth evidence from your artifacts, from your data set, from your if you did a literature review, a longer literature review, you're providing evidence of a phenomenon, a communication phenomenon, and or theories at work, and you're explaining it to us. You're interpreting evidence for us. If you are quoting material, you're quoting a speech, you're quoting a movie, explain those quotes to us. What is this? How does this reflect existing theory or challenge existing theory? All right. Tie that back to your overall thesis on argument to make sure that we are able to follow along with you, your chain of reasoning, as you are providing evidence and talking about it. I personally, once I have a thesis statement figured out, I'll put it on top of, or I'll print it out or write it and put it on top of my writing space to always make sure I'm tying things back and it relates to the thesis, and I'm not going down a rabbit hole that takes me away from my major ideas that I'm trying to bring forth. I'm going to give you some examples of analyses now so that you can have a better sense of what you can actually do in your analysis. Let's say my overarching claim, I'm doing a rhetorical project. So I'm looking at how rhetoric is able to do things and how people might use this rhetoric for ends in the future. How can they learn from this example in the future? So let's say I'm examining a presidential address. Basically, President Bill Clinton gave a national eulogy after the Oklahoma City bombing in the 90s when Timothy McVeigh bombed a building in Oklahoma City. It killed many people and it absolutely shocked the nation. It was one of the first instances of domestic terrorism in recent memory. And so Clinton took to the airwaves and to television to attempt to soothe the nation after the bombing. And I can argue that he did so through pathos, emotional appeals, and through providing a narrative for how to live after tragedy. Okay. And I would defend that claim through a couple of sub-arguments. So coming to sub-argument 1, I would use Neo-Aristotelian analysis, which helps us sort of do an analysis of speeches. It's a classic form to examine speeches. So through a lens of neo-Aristotelian analysis, I will show how Clinton soothes the nation after the Oklahoma City bombing through pathos appeals. Then I would take several paragraphs and pages to show you evidence from the speech, textual evidence to soothe the nation. I could also marshal evidence from news articles reacting to the speech, people saying how they felt about the speech. But I want to work primarily from that artifact if I'm using neo-Aristotelian analysis. In sub-argument 2, I might pull on narrative theory to explain how Clinton soothes the nation through a narrative for how to live after tragedy. So Clinton provided a story of how people are already helping each other to move on from this tragedy, how people are donating money to the families to help them rebuild and regroup and grieve without the stress of worrying about their finances, things like that. So I would talk about how Walter Fisher discusses plot and characters in a story can help people feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. Okay. And then if you have a third sub-argument for how Clinton soothes the nation through his speech, go for it. But I think 2 sub-arguments are enough to get you several pages of analysis. We're talking at least 6 to 8 pages of analysis alone. Alrighty. I'm going to present you with another example. Okay, you may not be old enough to remember this, but in the early 2000s, there was the first iteration or version of Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. And if you think about the context of that time, this was one of the first shows that was primarily featuring a gay cast that was going to help straight guys have a better dating life, a better life and professional life. They were going to change his apartment, change his behavior, anything you can think of to make a guy appear more dateable and attractive. And at the end of every show, the cast of gentlemen, gay gentlemen, would return to the loft to debrief and to watch footage of their straight guy benefiting from their tutelage. Okay, so they all came back together and talked about what they did to help this guy find romance. He'd go on a date or do something else romantic for somebody with all the new knowledge he learned from his gay friends, basically. So looking at this through a critical lens from a set of theories, here's what my academic paper would argue. My overarching claim might be the original Queer Eye for the Straight Guy promotes a heterosexual and romance-centered ideology that places gays on the periphery. Okay, so stick with me for a second. Let's say my method, the methodology I used was to analyze several episodes, and the critical lens or the theoretical lens I looked through was ideological criticism, which you may be familiar with. It states that that powerful members of a society will forward an ideology that benefits the most powerful in a community and will oppress people with less power. Okay, and if you think about it, gays and lesbians, members of the LGBTQIA plus community have been marginalized basically always. And so at least in current American culture, which is the target of this media artifact. So ideological criticism, we know, seeks to uncover what ideologies are buried within an artifact. Okay, we know ideologies are formed through social interaction, including pop culture and reality TV shows. I might share some of the key movers and shakers or scholars that have come before to establish ideological criticism: McGee, McCarroll, Wander, Condit, etc. And then I would move into my analysis. So my main argument, well, actually, that should say sub-argument 1. My main argument is the overarching claim that's at the top of this slide. But my main argument 1 might be, my sub-argument might be heterosexual men are featured prominently as deserving of love through this program, whereas gays, again, play a supporting role in dating. They're not the daters themselves. Their love lives are not featured or talked about. They're separate from heterosexual romance, which reinforces an ideology that heterosexual love is what deserves attention. And so my evidence for this argument might be that I've watched an entire season and only heterosexual relationships were featured. Gay men have a space in this media artifact, but as people who are qualified to advise straight men. All right. And this is reinforced when they retreat to the loft, to their designated space, to then watch the romance happen. They're not even there to watch it unfold. All right. And then I might present some other things I noticed. And then my next argument might be, hey, and it's only gay men who are featured in this. Lesbians and other people who are part of this community are not at all featured in Queer Eye. They're erased by their absence. And then I might give examples or share more about why I'm making that argument. But I marshal evidence for these claims. I would bring in the theory to support the claims I'm making, talk about the erasure of people who do not fall into heterosexual love category. And then I'd explain how this all feeds into an ideology and why we need to be critical of that kind of ideology that doesn't leave space for people of marginalized identities. So I hope that gives you an idea of one way to structure an analysis with sub-arguments. And that being said, let's move into the conclusion. All right. Oftentimes we think, oh, this is just a few paragraphs. I can wrap it up by summarizing what I already said. No, don't give this section short shrift, especially in a conference-worthy paper. We want to remind our readers about the significance of our essay. What is this essay offered? Why is my argument ultimately important? Start working through some implications. Answer this question, so what? It's hard to do, but tell us, why does this ultimately matter? Okay, well, this gives us a clear example of why we need to be critical of media like reality TV shows, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and aim to do better. Or by offering this example for you, I have shared how scholars can critique other reality TV shows for other ideological elements that we need to be critical of. The so what answer is going to depend on you and your project, but make sure it's there. And of course, in your conclusion, you're also reminding us of the thesis that you presented at the beginning, what your goals were for the project and the key findings. How did you answer the research question? How did you complete the promises that you laid out, that you set out to do in your thesis? All right. And then what are the limitations of your project? What were you unable to do due to time restrictions or space restrictions? So what's left to uncover? How would future scholars expand or add to what you've done? Could they look at other reality shows from the same time period or across the last 30 years in order to expand upon what you started? This is not downplaying the intervention that you've done here. It's saying, I've extended the conversation, and now someone can take this further and think through the next iteration, the potential directions for future research. And then finally, concluding last lines or takeaways from the reader. This is where you sum it all up and sort of give us food for thought. Okay. If I were going to conclude with a final paragraph for this Queer Eye project, I might say something like, what this essay has aimed to do is elucidate how programs like this forward an ideology in which gay men only have temporary access to mainstream culture and romance before they are relegated to their own space, and other members of the LGBTQ community are completely absent. This has consequences, as I've said above, and I hope that this research helps us be more attuned to ways in which media promotes perceptions of marginalized groups. That could probably be improved upon, but I'm just leaving a lasting impact on my reader, telling them why it all matters and giving us hope for the future. Okay? We are at the conclusion section, so we are almost done, but I have one more slide of general tips because academic writing can be scary, but the more you do it and the more you follow the steps and the more critical you are of your own work and the more you revise it, you will be more comfortable with it and it'll be something that you can do time and time again. And so you want to ask yourself as you're writing your analysis, but other parts of your essay too, am I adhering to my chosen methods for analysis and my research question? And so for this subject, am I keeping communication in the conversation at all times? All right. Go beyond the obvious. Really tell us answer the so what question. Why does this matter? Okay. Sell the importance of your project from top to bottom. Make sure you're supporting that thesis statement, the promise that you made at the beginning of the paper. And if you're not, does your thesis need to be rewritten in part or all in all? Or do you need to tighten up your analysis or go in a different direction? Always use internal previews. Here's what I'm about to tell you about. And summaries. Here's what I just talked about to help your reader make sense of it all. It's a long paper. Help yourself make sense of where you're going as well through these signposts. Always offer textual evidence or scholarly evidence to support your claims. So aim to come from the text first. So you're not just narrating what you see, but you're presenting textual evidence and then supporting what that means and interpreting it for us. We want to hear your voice rather than a summary of just what you've heard or read. And always assume your reader is unfamiliar with any theories that you provide and any texts or artifacts that you discuss. So I have never heard about this. Explain it to me so I can understand it and follow your reasoning. And oh, I guess I promised one last slide, but to review, these are the parts of your academic essay. Make sure that you're answering each one fully and carefully, and you'll have a great academic paper. Don't be shy about asking people to look at your work and to get help where it's needed. And good luck. Enter that Parler and be confident about sharing your thoughts and ideas because they're great and they're unique to you. All right. I hope this is helpful. Take care and good luck. Happy writing.